Okay, well, let's get started. We're going to shift gears a little bit today. Normally we focus on build topics. We had been sort of running through this build series that we called Getting Started to help people understand, when to use applications and why, and good use cases and best practices. And last week we focused on NASC and adding a custom generative AI call to a workflow to generate marketing announcements. And so today we're going to shift gears just a little bit. We don't really want to talk about products too much in the Academy. We want to focus mostly on building. But today we're going to talk about developer sandboxes, which is an exciting new product that's specific to building. And so we thought it would be interesting to discuss here. And we'll have a demo at the end and show you exactly how sandboxes work. And so who is on a team of more than three developers? Because sandboxes are really meant for people that or people and teams that are looking to accomplish more and doing more in parallel. And so I'm seeing some thumbs up. Who's on a team of um, how about 10 or more developers, like quite a large team? Do we have any of those? Because that's really sort of the bigger the team is, the bigger the value proposition is for sandboxes. So let's talk about that today. We do need to, we always need to start with the safe harbor statement. I think we also are going to talk about ProDev and IDE and Fluent very briefly. And so we might make some forward-looking statements around that. But Sandboxes is available. It's a product that just hit GA. And so when we talk about sandboxes themselves, all of this is currently available. When we talk about what's happening in Fluent and we look at what's going to happen in the future, we'll make sure to clarify that. So what we're seeing. Oh, I'm sorry. And also, we have an opportunity here if you're interested in being involved in a research opportunity. And so, what we'd love to have you do if you have 20 minutes to spare is grab this QR code or the URL and just provide some feedback on how you utilize Flow Designer and playbooks. I looked at the questions, they're pretty interesting, and you have a chance of winning a $20 gift card or I think a t-shirt. So an opportunity to possibly get some cool ServiceNow swag. All right. So what we're seeing is yep, I will. Jay, I'll try and get back to that. Actually, here I will just hop back just for a second. Here, if you just grab a screenshot, we are all right. Great. And thank you for that. Our team is very busy today, and so we weren't able to have anyone else hop on to support Q&A. So I'll do the best I can here. All right. So, what we're seeing is that, traditional ServiceNow development is starting to be a bit outdated, right? And so, when we've been communicating with customers that are early adopters for developer sandboxes, there's a number of different reasons why you might be interested in using development sandboxes. And so it's the spectrum of sort of how a traditional team might build on the ServiceNow platform, how pro-dev teams might utilize it, and then also how your platform might fit into the bigger enterprise architecture, because that's really what we're after, right? What we want to do is have our users realize a lot of value from the platform, but then what we also want is, how can we extend the reach of all of the benefits that ServiceNow provides further out into the enterprise. But so we have what we see is a lot of more traditional development style shops really utilize sandboxes for a number of different reasons. And one of the primary use cases that we were surprised by when we were talking with customers, is that, having just a single instance, customers felt like it could really hamper innovation. And sandboxes can really help there, because what they do is they partition all of the changes within an instance to a specific sandbox. And so what's great is if you want to experiment with code or changes, you can do that in a transient environment that you can remove once the experimentation is over. But what's also very cool is you can install plugins into a sandbox and it won't affect the host instance. And we'll talk about how this architecture all fits together in the next slide. But so there's a lot of opportunities for traditional teams to, if that's how you classify your team and how it works, to utilize sandboxes. But what we're also seeing is this blend of teams that primarily have built on ServiceNow, but then also off-platform teams that are coming to build on the platform. And what this segment of users is looking for is, really using a modern version control and Git. And so that allows for, branching and merging and, being able to store all of your IP that you've been working so hard on in version control. And that's also where we see developer sandboxes fitting into the picture, is to align with enterprise IT standards. So we're seeing more and more customer need to be able to participate in a standard CI/CD process, but then also utilize version control to store for IP management, right? So a place where you have a single snapshot and you can accumulate all of your different changes. And so this is where we see sort of the primary use cases or I guess, drivers for people to be interested in utilizing sandboxes in your developer workflow. All right, so how do sandboxes work? There's well, first of all, how many people have seen some of the videos on YouTube or heard about sandboxes, acknowledge, just give me a thumbs up. Like, let's see if anyone if this is a brand new topic for everybody, or if people have been aware of sandboxes and that it was coming. It doesn't look like a whole lot. So let's start from the top. And so what sandboxes do is they are not additional subprod instances. Sandboxes run within the context of a host instance. And like I said before, what they do is they create an isolated environment where all of the different changes that you might do from a configuration or developer perspective are going to be isolated to that particular sandbox. What it doesn't do is isolate the data itself to one of those sandboxes. So a good example of this is if you were to write a business rule that runs whenever an incident is created, then that is going to be isolated to the sandbox that the developer is working within. But if you were to insert a new record into the incident table, that would not be isolated. So that would be shared across all of the different host instance, or all of the different sandboxes in the host instance. And so what's really powerful is there's a relationship here between the subprod instance and the sandboxes. So when a sandbox is provisioned, what occurs is uh, it basically starts with the baseline snapshot of the current instance of the subprod instance. So what's really powerful is if you look at these sandboxes where if you were to start an agile sprint or you were to start a development cycle, you could start up a number of different sandboxes, assign them to the different developers. Now they would be isolated from each other's changes, but you're guaranteed that all of those sandboxes are starting from exactly the same image. And so that's very different. We see a lot of people maybe experiment or perform risky or large development tasks on PDIs. And that's really where we can run into a lot of trouble because we don't have any uh, synchronization between the configuration of the subprod instance and prod. and those PDIs. And so that's one reason why this is substantially better than utilizing PDIs. Another is now as an organization, you have control over all of these different instances. And so there's some other advantages too, but that we'll talk about as we progress through the deck. But we definitely want you to think more about sandboxes as probably a better option than PDIs for a number of different reasons. And so typically, where we see a best practice is that you really want to be utilizing version control with Git to synchronize all of the different changes between the sandboxes and the subprod instance. There are some customers though that exclusively use update sets, and it is possible to use sandboxes, and you're still going to realize the value from having these isolated development environments. What's the sort of issue with that though is now you're assuming the liability of all the manual overhead of the keeping track of which update sets or which in which sandboxes, then merging the update sets or batching the update sets to create the work increment. So it's absolutely possible if that's a better fit for your workflow. Certainly, version control in Git is exactly aligned with this process, and we'll talk about that in a second. Where Git was really intended for um, distributed development, where we have all of these people working on the Linux kernel in geographically different areas. And thank you for your question, Nancy, about the app repo, and we will answer that in just a sec. So appreciate that and keep those coming. Um, and so it's really just aligns more with how Git was intended to work. And so let's drill into that a little bit more. If we look on the left side here, this is how development has happened on a single instance traditionally, right? Where Abel and Joe are developing on the subprod instance, and all of the conflicts and all of the issues resulting to with or from building on the same instance, that all occurs before the merge to Git, right? So yes, in this traditional development model, there is version control. We can check things into Git, but it really didn't fit the way that Git was intended. And so if we look on the right side where we're using sandboxes, this is exactly how Git was intended now, where Abel and Joe, when these sandboxes are provisioned, we know they're the same, but they can perform all of their different changes isolated within the context of their sandbox. And then they can utilize version control to check in their changes and use Git now to merge all of those changes. And you can do that according to your best practices. And so, we are seeing more use cases than just aligning with Git workflows. Like I said, we are seeing people use them for just for kind of scratch instances for experimentation and for testing. But this is really how you might want to consider utilizing sandboxes. So as an example, let's look at see how all of this might fit together from a agile development perspective. Right, so we have a subprod instance, and the subprod instance has this main branch that that's really the branch of record, right? So when we create a release, and we'll talk about the deployment and migration strategy in just a second, where you create a release that this is where you want to um, utilize the code base from. So what we can do now is allocate these different sandboxes. And what we really want you to think about with these sandboxes is these should be ephemeral and transient. What we don't really want is to have these sandboxes long-lived. From a best practice perspective, you're free to utilize it how you want, but from a practice perspective, it's seeming like you're going to get the most value if you essentially create and deallocate the sandboxes in the context of a sprint. And the reason why that's important is that the longer a sandbox is alive, the more it's going to drift from the baseline configuration. And so a lot of the power with these sandboxes is that you're getting exactly the mirror image with all of these different sandboxes, but you're also getting the benefits of, where people used to traditionally build in a PDI or, maybe another subprod instance. So it's really kind of the best of all worlds here. So once we have the sandbox allocated and aligned to the start of the sprint, what we can do now is create branches within each of these different sandboxes, right? And so this allows Abel and Joe to perform all of their metadata changes. They're isolated in the sandbox. And so, over time during the sprint, they accumulate all of the changes. And now, when one of their tasks is complete, they can commit the change to their sandbox branch, and then you can use Git to determine the order and the time when you want to merge all of these changes. And so you can see here, kind of how powerful of a concept it is. And this is maybe the simplest branching strategy that might make sense here. But you can see how powerful this is, where it can scale right to a number of different developers and sandboxes. And one of the real advantages of this is, let's say you're in the middle of a sprint and Abel receives a break fix that he needs to perform. So there's a bug that he needs to fix it. In the past, how would you do that? You'd need to stash changes. You'd need to try and decipher if there were any changes that were specific to this development cycle that is different than production. But what's great about this is, because the subprod instance, we started fresh from the baseline image. What Abel can do now is spin up another sandbox. We know that none of his changes are that from the sprint exist in that sandbox. He can perform the break fix, check into main, and then release it. Right. So very powerful options and a lot of flexibility. And we're really seeing um, people think about these sandboxes in a number of different ways. Right. Yeah, I see a thumbs up. Thank you. It's a really powerful lever, right? And so originally, we were sort of thinking, these developers are going to get these sandboxes at the beginning of each sprint, and then they're going to perform all their work. But what we're seeing is customers look at more granular options, where, maybe for a specific story, Abel would get a new sandbox, and then he'd complete those changes, check off his changes in, and then for his next story, we'd allocate a new sandbox for him. And so again, that's just can be part of your strategy of, how frequently do you want to align to the baseline image from the subprod instance. And then that can also fit into, your clone down strategy from prod to this subprod instance. But you can see here how much flexibility you have, a much more powerful option. And finally, and this was Nancy's question, is certainly you would mark the release point in Git, but using sandboxes does not preclude you from using or changing your existing process, right? So really what this is it allows us to accumulate all of the different changes from multiple parallel development work streams, merge them into this one, into your main branch, and then you can utilize your existing release process. Now, we'd love for you to use App Engine Management Center, AEMC, or look at the brand new Release Ops, which is just coming out. And Release Ops, is a new pipeline that supports update sets, so it can instrument the movement of update sets throughout your instance architecture. But Sandboxes doesn't require any of that. Really, it's how are you going to allow for these concurrent changes, tie it all back together in a work increment, and then you can release it from the subprod instance like you normally would. But the important thing here is to understand, once that release happened, now you're going to want to consider what does this do for your sandbox strategy, right? Should all of the sandboxes be deallocated, and then start with that change? I would think so. But again, you have flexibility to decide how that's going to work best for your organization. Okay, what's really great about this, and we've alluded to this, is that what Sandboxes allows you to do is provision and deallocate these isolated environments very quickly. I have instantly on here on demand. It's not instant. I need to change that. It takes about it depends, but it can be maybe 15 minutes or 30 minutes. But still, that is very quick, right? And so, if I were thinking about how to utilize this into an agile process, probably what I do is when we're starting the actual work part of the stories, once they've all been scored and assigned and sequenced, and the backlog has been groomed, then we can now allocate all of those different sandboxes. Everyone can work within the context of their sandbox, and we know that that they're all the same. I'd mentioned before that, we're seeing people utilize these in a number of different ways that maybe it wasn't a surprise, but it certainly wasn't primary use cases that we had thought of. And one of the main ways that people are thinking about that is in the context of testing, right? So what's great now is you can utilize the sandbox to pull in a branch, test the changes on that branch. Like I said before, you can also now use a sandbox to install additional plugins or new versions of a product or a new product entirely, right? And so what you can do now is utilize that sort of as a temporary instance, maybe do your testing and then deallocate that instance. And what's great about that is you're keeping your subprod instance clean, right? So the host instance doesn't have to accumulate those changes if you don't want, because now it's in the context of sandbox and you can just deallocate it, right? So lots of different options, totally up to your imagination to think about how you can utilize these environments, and really it's a very flexible. Okay, so just let's talk about how sandbox are packaged, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the limitations of XML and Fluent in IDE, right? The very newest development tools that are coming out that you probably heard of. So sandboxes are a new product. They're a paid product, and they are standalone, and so they are not included or packaged with any of other products. And the way that they work is they're sold in increments of 10, and those 10 sandboxes are available, or they're bound to a single instance. And so if you had, let's say you had 3 subprod instances, what you couldn't do is buy 10 sandboxes and spread them across those different instances. They're all bound to one, and then you can also stack instances up to 30. Now, this is a soft limit, but it's possible that if you were to coordinate with our engineering team, you could install more. But that's where when people well, the reason why this is actually a good thing is, in my mind, when you start thinking about substantially more sandboxes than 30, then you really need to think about the relationship between your subprod instance architecture and sandboxes, right? And so this is an important concept, because sandboxes are not a replacement for subprod instances, right? So what sandboxes do is work very well within the context of a project or several projects that are on a similar cadence and that are going to start from the same baseline, right? Because we talked about how there's a relationship between the sandboxes and the subprod instance, where we really want you to look at them as temporary environments that are spun up and spun down frequently to keep them aligned with that baseline instance. If you have a number of different strategic projects and several different work streams, and teams start working within a different cadence, where they need to install plugins, and then they need essentially a different version of different products on the platform. That should be divided that should be divided by subprod instances. And so we just want to be very clear that what we don't really recommend is if the team isn't really sort of working together within the context of a project, thinking about collapsing down a bunch of subprod instances and viewing developer sandboxes as a cheaper option. Just e- while technically you could do that, we don't think you're going to get the value there, just because um, if you're trying to align these different projects that need different baseline instances from the host subprod instance, you can probably see how that could get very complicated, and you would start losing the value of being able to be extremely confident that everyone's developing with the exact same baseline configuration, right? So just some information there about the subprod instances. Now, who here has committed different branches to Git, maybe syncing from a PDI to a subprod instance and has had issues doing that? I'm not seeing a whole lot of thumbs, but there's that. Yeah, so that's an issue. And so we want to be very clear about if you're doing traditional development, and then how you can still develop a good strategy to be successful with Git, and how our low code tools currently handle XML metadata changes. But we also want to talk about now with IDE and Fluent. And so a lot of this just um, really depends on what's going to be your strategy going forward? Do you want to stay low code, or do you really want to start looking at full stack pro development? We'll look at how that's an option, and more and more AI, and the term vibe coding keeps coming up that I don't love, but how that's starting to be options from the IDE side. But let's just talk about the pros and cons about this, because that's what's really important, is that you understand exactly kind of the relationship with how we're currently managing XML metadata in sandboxes. And so certainly Git can handle merging changes between XML and sandboxes. The way, though, because these changes are accumulated incrementally when you're building the different changes, it isn't going to be the way in if you were to start a full stack project by hand. The way that it saves files, the way that it names files isn't going to be the way that you would probably do it if you were to create a React project or a Node project, right? So those have specific directory structures where specific files go. The way that ServiceNow saves all their changes, it's just in a flat structure. So it can absolutely utilize all of Git's power to merge. But what we want you to do is think about how you can be most successful. And this again gets back to your branching and merging strategy within the context of a sprint, right? So what I would recommend, and the way is to have Git merge tools as a backup, and then you could merge conflicts. But think about how you can sequence changes to avoid that as much as possible. And so a lot of that, honestly, is probably going to be spinning up and spinning down sandboxes more frequently within the context of a project, and committing changes to master or to main more often, right? So that just the longer the work goes between a commit to or a merge from a sandbox branch to the main branch, the more likelihood you're going to run into conflicts. So again, just want you to be very aware of the difficulty in merging this XML based metadata, but it certainly doesn't preclude you from realizing the value from sandboxes. There's just some strategies that you can use when you're thinking about the velocity and sizing the stories, where you can probably avoid most of the merge conflicts, and that would be definitely to your benefit. So what that leads us to, though, is Fluent, right? So Fluent is a domain-specific language built by ServiceNow that extends TypeScript, which it's complicated, transpiles to JavaScript, right? So eventually it gets to JavaScript. What the benefit of Fluent is that it is a representation of all of the same changes that you would make in the system in a directory structure and in a language that's much easier for you to merge manually. And so you see here that we have a large support, definitely the kernel of an application, the data model. business rules, lists and views, all of that is currently supported in Fluent. The thing that I'm most excited about upcoming is flows, and we'll make a forward-looking statement in a second about some other frameworks that are going to be options that I'm very excited about. But if you were interested in performing heavy branching and merging, having strategic projects that are going to be long-lived and not going to be merged very frequently, that's where you can think about maybe having a layered architecture where the core of the application was built in Fluent and kind of the Chrome and the UI and the business processes were built using the low-code tools. And so again, that's a pretty sophisticated approach, but that's really a way where you can start thinking about unlocking kind of the full power of all of the different tools available to you on the platform. So these upcoming things, again, there's let's just that I'll just say that's a safe harbor statement around that, but these are coming, and so most importantly here, I'm very excited about the flows and script includes in the service catalog. And so the reason, let's just take a look though at, we've already alluded to this some, but the difference here is it's very powerful, right? Where we're representing the same information. But you see here, the bottom Fluent view looks much more like code that someone would write off platform. And so this is Fluent. This is our domain specific language specific to ServiceNow. And so what that does is that gives us the ability to use Git merge tools to very easily merge all of these different changes. And so the combination of the representation of the, I'm starting to rhyme here, representation of the configuration, it's much more manageable from a human standpoint. And when you utilize a Fluent project, you're creating your own directory structure and you have control over it. Those all allow you to think about big projects that that aren't going to merge very frequently because now we can really unlock the full power of Git. So let me just check here. It looks like we have a question. Are they always cloned from prod? That's going to be up to you. That is, again, that's going to fit into your your strategy right now whenever you do clone down. So, I don't think we have an official recommendation, but for me, I always like to keep prod and subprod relatively similar just to limit the surprises when you do releases. But this doesn't require any changes in that existing strategy. Okay, and so we are going to get to a demo here. Let me see how we're doing on time. And so we just have a couple more slides and then we'll hop into the platform. Okay, and so now, this is where IDE fits in, right? And so if we look on the Git native side, this is really a traditional developer experience. And honestly, it's based on VS Code. So it's pretty amazing. ServiceNow IDE is a customized version of VS Code that's embedded in platform. So very cool, gives you a lot of options to engage, full stack developers or people that are, more interested in a code first build environment. But what's really cool is because this is all code based, the AI interaction with this code is extremely powerful. So, when we talk about vibe coding, it's really pretty amazing what it can generate. And this is going to be I want to be very clear that, this is a forward-looking statement. And so we want to wrap this with a safe harbor is that what we're expecting to come out very soon is AI powered generation of your own UI framework like React. And so that's pretty amazing, right? Where you can build the back end with Fluent. That's going to be AI augmented, but then you can also start thinking about using React and all of the third-party libraries available, with animations, full control over the UI. And so now you're really thinking about, utilizing a full stack environment within the ServiceNow platform. You get the benefits of the back end, the workflow, but then you also accumulate some of the security for the front end. So very powerful option if you do need to engage that level of customization. All right. So key takeaways, and then let's see how this thing works. Right, is that we really want you to understand that dev sandboxes are not a replacement for sandboxes one-to-one. Sometimes they can be, but just from a financial standpoint, we don't really want you to think about it in that way. Not anything to do with money, but just there's probably a reason why you already have multiple subprod instances if you do, to divide, maybe an HRSD project from CSM and ITSM, and so that scenario you're still going to want to keep your subprod instances, but what now you can do is introduce these isolated development environments within the context of those work streams. Like I mentioned, Git is preferred. You can certainly use update sets, but it sounds like a lot of work to me, and so I would recommend using Git. And when thinking about Git, just understand the trade-offs between XML and Fluent. Most of our customers that are utilizing it currently are not using Fluent. They're using XML. And so, like I said, if you create a good strategy, you can derive a lot of value from it, and not have a whole lot of merge headaches. So that is that for the deck. Let me just stop share here and switch the to Chrome, and we can take a look at it running here. And oop, I talked so much, I just my instance timed out. So let me get back in, and then I will share. Okay. All right. So let's go to, I'm going to refresh this here. So the important thing here is to look at the URLs, right? So what happens is when we have a sandbox that is allocated, you can control what the subdomain is. And so if we were to click on Joey, then you see here that it's still the URL, but it has just a little bit of a different subdomain that denotes that we are now in the context of a sandbox. So if we go back to the host instance, we can see that there's no Joey. It's only in the host instance here. And so what I did is I just created a simple JavaScript script include, so we can see we can see how the data isolation works. So who's using modern JavaScript? Is anyone using ES12, or are most people still using the older JavaScript? I love this syntax, so glad to see some people are using it. But you can see I just created a very simple script include here that can do addition. And so if I were just to go into here and run it as a background script, add 4 and 3 and 4, and let's just the GS input here. Right, so let's just run this. We can see here that this gives us 7. But so if we go to, now let's go to Joey's instance. And what I'm going to do is background script. Actually, I need a new tab here too. All right, so we see that we're in a sandbox. And so what I'm going to do is go to that exact same script include. Oop. And we can see that it looks the same, right? Because we've just created this. And so now I'm going to just grab this code here and run it. Yep. So this looks the same, right? And that's what we'd expect. But if I were to go here and just add a new operation, let's save this. and then run it, right, we get -1, but if I were to copy this back to the host instance, let's just refresh this. Right, see, that's the same, and so if we were to run this here, we can't see it, right? So these changes are totally isolated. So a little bit, it's such a powerful product, but the demo kind of is a little bit of a letdown. But I think just from, it's sort of hard to see what's happening. But if you think about this here, it's really powerful, right? Because what we did within the context of our subprod instance. We created this different sandbox. You can see we can retire it. We can hop straight into it, and all of these changes now are completely separate. And so that's a really powerful option to think about. You know, what are our developers doing in the context of a project? But then also, like we talked about before, what are they doing mid-flight when they're performing changes that we want to release at the end of a sprint, but they're also supporting production as well. So again, just more ways to view sandboxes to increase your flexibility there. And I got a question: how did he toggle and control what sandbox he hopped into? So really, it's just this subdomain. Like I said, so I could go. What I did is I just clicked on Joey here, so I could click on Able, and you see here this subdomain is fired up, or is here. And so you don't have to go through you don't ever have to go to the subroute instance. So, one of your policies that you could think about is, your developers, and when they're within the context of a sprint, they just directly log into the sandbox using their subdomain. And so, again, that's those are all options available to you in the context of your software development lifecycle. So that is what I had today. Hopefully, everyone isn't disappointed because we were hoping to see more cool builds with AI. But we are definitely going to get back to that for the next session. We'll get back to building. I think we're going to utilize a little bit more NASC and tools, and because that's really how you can utilize AI and get start seeing value now, and then we'll start transitioning to agentic AI. So as always, appreciate everyone joining, and please reach out to me or your account team if you're interested in checking sandboxes out. So appreciate it and have a good day. Thanks, everybody.